Hey friends, welcome to episode 553 of the My 123 Cents podcast. I called an audible. I posted on my social media earlier in the week that I was going to do a Q&A, and I was going to record before I left. You can obviously see I'm not in Southern Illinois at the moment. We are on a extended weekend vacation, but I decided that I wanted to keep the wrestling theme going for one more week, and then next week I'm going to end up doing the Q&A because I'm going to be traveling next week as well. So busy couple of weeks here for me, but I did want to get a podcast in, and I figured, I've kind of rebranded my beer reviews as poor decisions, and so I'm kind of calling this poor decisions / wrestling under the influence. Found a local brew here called it's from Perfect Plain Brewing Company. It's called Pensacola Pog. I was gonna do, I was trying to remember, I as a kid, the Pog phase kind of, I was too old for Pogs, I guess. I always remember the funny line from The Simpsons where Milhouse says, "Alf is back and in Pog form." WWF, the New Generation era, had a collection of Pogs. Never got into that because by that time I'm in college and not really collecting. If I found some today, I might pick them up and just kind of take a look at them. I don't really remember the whole concept behind Pogs, so I thought instead of talking about Pogs, which I'm doing a lot of already, since this is called Perfect Plain, thought I'd talk about one of the all-time greats in wrestling history, and that is Mr. Perfect, Curt Hennig. And I can remember back in my early fandom, he was a babyface tag teaming with Scott Hall during the AWA days. They were the AWA Tag Team Champions. I think they famously lost the tag team titles to Playboy Buddy Rose and Doug Summers. And it wasn't long after that. Well, I guess then Curt Hennig turned heel along the way. But it took me a while to realize that Scott Hall later became Diamond Stud. I knew when Diamond Stud debuted, he looked familiar, and I don't remember how long it took me to put the connection together, but obviously his look and appearance changed pretty drastically from those early days in the tag team. But Curt kind of stayed the same and turned heel, of course, I would say 86, 87, won the AWA Heavyweight Championship, beat Nick Bockwinkel, used a roll of quarters, and I think for a long time Curt had been a babyface, and fans really resonated and connected with him on that babyface level. And then he kind of showed that cocky side in the AWA, which I feel like kind of laid then the groundwork for an amazing run in the WWF from I want to say 1988 through definitely 91 when he was actively wrestling, and then of course took a little bit of a sabbatical. But it's hot out already this morning, and this beer is sweating, so I'm going to go ahead and give it a pour. It's 4.2% alcohol by volume, and you see there a nice pour. This is, by the way, it's called Tropical Sour, Pensacola Pog Tropical Sour, and it is brewed right here in the Pensacola area. 4.2% passion fruit, orange, guava. Add a tropical flair, spelled F-L-A-I-R, to this punch-inspired fruited sour. So we're getting Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect together with this drink, which is kind of apropos as well. So let's, really getting the passion fruit, the aroma of those different fruits in this. And so it doesn't really stand out as a sour. It's not sour at all, in my opinion. I do like the fruit. The back end, I'm getting a bit of a sour kick to it. That's pretty good. Definitely the perfect beer, if you will, for a day at the beach, which I'll be enjoying the rest of this as we continue to talk about the legacy, the life of Mr. Perfect. Like I said, he debuts in the WWF in 88, I believe it's the summer of 88, and he doesn't have quite the Mr. Perfect swagger or style that we later end up seeing through the years, wrestles in the same trunks that he was wrestling in the AWA. And I don't know exactly when it happened or how it happened, but he ends up going to that, I guess, singlet style look, the neon, paired with the Genius, which I thought was an interesting pairing. I thought that they were trying to do some things with Lanny Poffo, which ultimately worked. I liked the Genius incarnation of Lanny Poffo much more so than him as leaping Lanny Poffo. And as that heel manager, it worked. And the pairing with Mr. Perfect was unique and interesting. But I do think that Perfect was, pardon the pun, perfect for the Heenan family. It only made sense for him to develop that persona and then really take it to the next level, that level of arrogance like we talked about in his early AWA days, where he makes that debut as a babyface, eventually turns heel and wins that company's world championship. And I think that a lot of people talk about Mr. Perfect as being one of those guys who coulda, shoulda, woulda won the WWF Heavyweight Championship. And I think a lot of people invalidate the AWA Championship run because by that time the AWA is going through a lot of changes, and I feel like, you know, while I was watching, I would go home after school and catch it on ESPN, and it's kind of on the downward slope at that point. I think that, you know, in the early 80s when I first started watching wrestling, AWA had a little more prestige. You know, Nick Bockwinkel, Rick Martel, Stan Hansen, those were the champions that I can really remember kind of standing out as being the namesakes of the company. And then of course the evolution is going on, and you know, as Vince McMahon is expanding the World Wrestling Federation, Jim Crockett Promotions sells off to Ted Turner. So we've got those two kind of rising, WWF more so obviously, and you know, in the late 80s even still, you know, we had that big rush in '84, you know, with Bobby Heenan and Hulk Hogan, and I guess Hogan came in '83. But you know, you had a lot of that AWA talent from from Hulk Hogan and Dr. D and Andre the Giant, even going from the AWA, jumping over to the World Wrestling Federation, and then rising to prominence in a global scale, really. And so you can't fault a guy like Curt Hennig for wanting to take advantage of that situation and grow and develop and become a worldwide name, and someone that is, you know, for as many faults as Vince McMahon has or had during his time, he made a lot of people rich and gave a lot of prominence and fame and fortune to a lot of men and women in the world of professional wrestling. And Curt Hennig is a again, pardon the pun, perfect example of that. I really liked the heel cockiness of Mr. Perfect. You know, he had some great matches in '89 with Bret Hart that kind of laid the foundation for the later match at SummerSlam '91, which lost me $5 to my friend Jim. We bet. I had my money on Mr. Perfect, of course, didn't know that he had the bad back and was going through a lot of pain during that whole situation, that he was the Intercontinental Champion. But, you know, when Kerry Von Erich came in, you know, Kerry Von Erich was my favorite at that time, and he comes in and wins the Intercontinental Championship, and only to lose it back a couple of months later. I was bummed about that, but, you know, Mr. Perfect, at that time, the Intercontinental title was always kind of classified as that workers' championship, and of course Perfect is in that era was one of the best workers there. You know, put him in there in the class with Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect, probably the two purest scientific wrestlers, if you will, that the company had at that time. And excuse me, the you know, the streak, if you will. I do think 1990 is a weird year in wrestling, and it's kind of that shift where we go from Hulk Hogan to the Ultimate Warrior. There have been arguments that maybe Mr. Perfect could have been, should have been the transitional champion in between Hogan and Warrior, and not had not have the Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan, two baby faces, wrestle at WrestleMania. it's an interesting dichotomy, and I would like to chat with others about this. Maybe Chad and I could dive deeper into early 90s wrestling, but I don't know what was missing there. To me, the WWF didn't have the heel factory built up quite as good, because we saw Hogan and Warrior kind of run through guys like Earthquake and Mr. Perfect and Ravishing Rick Rude. Like, there was total domination. Macho King Randy Savage had been at the top of the mountain, and he's kind of taken down a peg or two. So it felt like they really were lacking. So short of turning Hogan or Warrior heel, which I think maybe ultimately would have been the better solution, or they should have given Mr. Perfect or Rick Rude more legs to stand on, because even with Rude winning the Intercontinental title at WrestleMania 5, I still felt like he was just kind of holding it for the Warrior to eventually, and which happened, win the belt back. You had Hogan, Piper, and Warrior, your three top babies probably in '89, the last half of '89, and then Rude and Perfect they were touting this undefeated streak with, and then have him lose that at WrestleMania to Brutus the Barber Beefcake, I think was a misstep and a fail. I don't know if having Hogan lose the championship to Mr. Perfect at the Royal Rumble or a Saturday night's main event leading up to WrestleMania 6. And then if you want to try this anointment of Mr. Perfect, of the Ultimate Warrior, instead of him beating Hulk Hogan, he beats Mr. Perfect. But then again, that feels like Hogan Warrior on paper was a solid, and even the match itself was good. But allegedly, the rumors, the reports that the two didn't draw what they were hoping for, especially from, if you go back and look at WrestleMania 5, Hogan Savage was a huge rivalry. The previous WrestleMania, WrestleMania 4 was the tournament. WrestleMania 3, you have Hogan and Andre, which turned into a huge rivalry. So they didn't, in my opinion, take full advantage of having that typical storyline of where you have the anti-hero and the hero. And Mr. Perfect, I think, could have been a fill in that void. I also go back to, move forward a year to 1990. And during Warrior's run, instead of it being Sergeant Slaughter that ends that run, I would have gone with Ravishing Rick Rude, and then Rude takes on Hogan at WrestleMania 7. I know at the time we were doing the whole Iraq War and kind of keeping that cognizant in our minds, but I feel like Mr. Perfect or Ravishing Rick Rude would have served a better role as WWF champion at that time, and then put on, again, I don't watch wrestling for all the great work rate and stuff. I want to be entertained. I want story, but I think that Mr. Perfect in that role would have been great. Obviously, 1990 kind of goes back and forth with the Intercontinental Championship, wins it as a result of the Ultimate Warrior having to surrender it from winning the World Championship, and then loses it, like I said, to Kerry Von Erich, Texas Tornado at SummerSlam. Wins it back right after Survivor Series, I believe it was, and holds on to it then until the next SummerSlam. British Bulldog was kind of chomping at the bit, being groomed. I thought he was going to end up being the one to win it, but it ends up being Bret the Hitman Hart at SummerSlam 91 in a classic match. A lot of people still have that in their top wrestling matches, definitely top SummerSlam matches and IC title matches. And then after that, we learned that he's got a bad back, and he takes some time off and ends up becoming Ric Flair's advisor, goes into that managerial role, which I thought was amazing as well. And then by late 92, they have to call an audible and turn him face. And in my opinion, that is kind of where the Mr. Perfect mystique falls off. Guys like Paul Orndorff, Mr. Perfect, Ravishing Rick Rude, and Magnificent Morocco. Those are my four that I always kind of go back to and look at. With the name and the persona, it just made sense to be a heel. You're cocky, you're overconfident. Even the King stuff. I know Jerry Lawler spent years, decades probably, as a babyface, as the King. But I think on a much larger scale, you have that cocky name you want it to be associated with a cocky person. And I think that Mr. Perfect, continuing to call him Mr. Perfect. Now, if you look back and remember, and I only know this because of listening to the OVP Retro Wrestling podcast, I know they are doing the canon now, and they're talking about 1987. You know, Magnificent Morocco, Don Morocco, turns babyface in 87. And along the way, they start weaning away from Magnificent Morocco and start calling him The Rock. And I wonder if they should have done something similar with Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. You know, as a kid, I loved his babyface run, but looking back on it, I think they should have changed the persona, the name, to go along with the new persona, because you want someone with that name to be kind of an asshole and kind of cocky and over the top and whatnot. And same with Mr. Perfect. You know, you want that arrogance. And he still kind of exuded that arrogance as a face, but to me, it just, I was not a fan of Mr. Perfect as a face. You know, he and Bret Hart have that rematch at King of the Ring 93, and he's hot and cold going in and out of wrestling with the bad back. He turns again in 94 at WrestleMania against Lex Luger. And has, you know, a decent run then as a manager / advisor. And then I know he eventually jumps to the WCW and ends up having a run there and wrestled a little bit more. And I know there were things going on with his back and Lloyd's of London, and I don't know all the logistics of that. But, you know, for me, my favorite memories of him is that late 80s, early 90s, you know, up until 92, you know, really right before the face turn, you know, because he and Flair and Bobby Heenan, of course, you know, he was a great addition to the Heenan family. It made sense. You've got this arrogant guy, you've got this loudmouth leading the way for him. They were a perfect couple, if you will. And so I do kind of think that's his prime time, if you will, and his best era. Sadly, we lost him more than 20 years ago at the age of 44. Curtis Axel, his son, Michael McGillicuddy, he wrestled as well. But I feel like he was one of those, you know, we've talked about fathers and sons in wrestling before as well. And I think he just never really caught the break and got over the way his dad did. And sometimes I do feel sorry for those younger talents who we have this expectation, or we think that they should be just like their father, or, you know, Mr. Perfect 2 or whatever. You know, I don't know, and I don't think that's fair to the talent by any means. But I do think Mr. Perfect is one of the greats as far as an all-around wrestler. But I think he was one of the best heels in that era of the WWF, and in a different generation of the WWF, a different incarnation. I have no doubt he would have been the World Heavyweight Champion, along with probably Razor Ramon, as well as Rick Rude and Roddy Piper. Those are four guys I think in a different time frame would have been at the top of the mountain in the World Wrestling Federation. And again, not discounting what any of them did in the AWA or in Jim Crockett Promotions or in WCW or other territories or regions of the world of wrestling, but I just feel like there was a lot of potential there for Curt Hennig to be the man, not unlike his protege, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. So cheers to Mr. Perfect, cheers to Vacation Time, cheers to Perfect Plain and Perfect Plain Brewing, I should say, and their Tropical Sour Pensacola Pog. We will drink again soon, and we'll talk more wrestling. We will see you next time.